The bus was packed as usual during rush hour. People sat quietly or stood in the aisle, their faces buried in their phones or staring out the windows, lost in thought. But the atmosphere shifted when the bus stopped at a busy intersection, and an elderly black man boarded slowly, carrying a small, worn plastic bag with his belongings. His clothes were old and tattered, his shoes barely held together, and his face showed the wear of someone who had lived through countless hardships. He walked carefully toward an empty seat by the window, ignoring the stares from some passengers. The man's name was Mr. Thomas, and though life had been incredibly hard for him, his calm and dignified demeanor remained intact. As he sat down, a loud voice broke the quiet of the bus. "Hey, you live on the street?" The question came from a young white man standing in the aisle. His name was Brad, a man in his late 20s, dressed in a red hoodie and jeans, with an arrogant smirk on his face. The passengers glanced up, some shifting uncomfortably, but no one said a word. Brad wasn't done. "Look at you. What happened? Did you lose your house or something?" he sneered, laughing loudly. Mr. Thomas glanced up, meeting Brad's mocking gaze, but he didn't respond. He simply looked out the window, as if he'd heard it all before. What Brad didn't realize was that his cruel words were about to come back to haunt him in a way he never expected. What happened next would change his life forever. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that will make you think. And if you've ever witnessed an act of kindness, or cruelty, in public, share your experience in the comments below. Brad leaned closer to Mr. Thomas, his mocking tone growing louder. "I bet you don't even have $1 to your name," Brad said, shaking his head. "What's in the bag? Your life savings?" The other passengers started whispering among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. One woman leaned over to her friend and whispered, "Why doesn't someone stop him?" But no one stepped in. Brad continued, pointing at Mr. Thomas's worn shoes. "Look at those shoes. They've seen better days, huh?" he laughed. "How does it feel to have nothing?" Finally, Mr. Thomas spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and carried a quiet dignity that instantly silenced the bus. "You seem to think you know a lot about me," Mr. Thomas said, looking directly at Brad. "But let me ask you something. Do you know what it feels like to lose everything?" Brad blinked, caught off guard. "What?" he said, still trying to maintain his arrogant posture. "Do you know what it's like to have a family, a job, a home, and lose it all?" Mr. Thomas continued. "Do you know what it's like to wake up one day and realize that everything you've worked for is gone?" Brad hesitated. The smirk on his face started to fade. "I didn't think so," Mr. Thomas said. "Because if you did, you wouldn't be standing there, laughing at someone else's pain." The bus was completely silent now. Even the usual rumble of the engine seemed distant. "I wasn't always like this," Mr. Thomas said, his voice softening. "I had a family. A good job. A house. But life doesn't always go the way we plan." He paused for a moment, his eyes filled with emotion. "I lost my wife to cancer. I couldn't keep up with the bills. I lost my job. And then I lost my home." Brad shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his feet. "But I never lost my dignity," Mr. Thomas continued. "And I never lost my humanity." Brad opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked around, noticing the judgmental stares of the other passengers. Finally, one of the passengers spoke up, a middle-aged man sitting near the front of the bus. "You should be ashamed of yourself," the man said to Brad. "We're all just one bad day away from losing everything." The words hit Brad like a ton of bricks. He suddenly realized how cruel and heartless he had been. His face turned red with embarrassment. I didn't mean to," Brad stammered. But Mr. Thomas shook his head. "No need to apologize to me," he said. Apologize to yourself. Because someday, you might find yourself in my shoes. And I hope, if that day comes, someone shows you more kindness than you've shown me. With that, Mr. Thomas stood up as the bus pulled up to the next stop. He walked to the door, pausing for a moment. Kindness costs nothing, he said softly. But it can mean everything to someone in need. As he stepped off the bus, the doors closed behind him. Brad stood frozen in place, the weight of Mr. Thomas's words sinking in. The bus started moving again, and the passengers returned to their silence. But Brad couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Later that night, Brad sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through his phone. His usual posts were full of sarcasm and jokes at other people's expense. But tonight, he typed something different. Today, I learned a valuable lesson. You never know what someone else is going through. Everyone has a story, and we should treat each other with kindness. Because someday, it might be you who needs it. He hit post and leaned back in his chair. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. What would you have done if you were on that bus? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but it can change someone's life. Maybe even your own.